Welcome, everyone. My name is Darren Ash. I'm with the School for the Future of Innovation and Society here at ASU, and we're part of the College of Global Futures. Thank you for joining us today. Apologies for my head cold and for my antihistamine high, so I take no responsibility for what I say or do here today. So just want to thank everyone who's joining us either remotely or in person or even on recorded video recording that we have today. So thank you for joining us. And also thank you to our team here at the school to help get things online here. Thank you to Tina Mill, Executive Director of Social Embeddedness here at the school, who reminds our ASU staff that they have 8 hours of volunteer time each year to contribute to things like we're doing today. This is going to be, we're going to be talking about citizen science. If you're not familiar with citizen science, it is a field where everyday people can contribute to ongoing research, real research projects that are going on, topics from, we like to say, astronomy to zoology. So all sorts of different projects, hundreds of projects, thousands of projects even, that you can find on SciStarter.org. And someone mind putting that into the chat, SciStarter.org for me. And we're also, if you go to SciStarter, you can pull up also all sorts of these citizen science projects. We're also celebrating Citizen Science Month. So citizensciencemonth.org will bring you to a site where we kind of show you all the different things that are going on this month. There's a calendar there. We have featured projects every day. So you can check that out. And we're also highlighting a million acts of science. So during the month, we're trying to do 1 million contributions of data to citizen science, or people doing contributions of analysis, or people even just learning about citizen science. So check out citizenscience.org. And let's see, today, the project that we're doing, we're happy to have Garth Paine, who's a scholar and researcher here at ASU, join us today with his team. And they're going to be talking about community environmental listening and how you might be able to contribute to this project. That I will turn it over to Garth.
All right. Thank you so much. So hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. And thank you to all of those who are online. Today we're going to talk about community environmental listening, specifically in the context of the SciStarter project. And we're going to talk about the benefits of environmental listening, but we're also going to talk about the research questions that we're asking and how you as citizen science can actually make a big difference in terms of helping us address some of those questions. So let's get the slides rolling. So first of all, if we think about listening to our environment, it's something that we don't do very often. We don't take the time to just slow down and address our attention towards listening to our environment. And one of the things that we're really interested in doing is thinking about how conscious we are of the environment and how we can actually empower everybody in the community to build stewardship and agency around the environments in which you live. Our larger project, Community Environmental Listening, teaches the listening skills that are part of the SciStarter program to people across the globe. And the reason for doing that is that often people are concerned about climate impact and feel like it's such a big challenge that they can't really get involved in that. They can't address it. But actually, we can all address it at our own level. And part of what's required in order to really think about that is to engage much more deeply with the environments in which we live. So we're interested in thinking about building stewardship so that we can all think about what does it mean to have a more balanced ecosystem, and how does the benefit of feeling like we have a sense of community around that help develop that sense. Environmental listening also is extremely powerful in terms of well-being and health, and has both mental, physical, and emotional health benefits. And I'll talk briefly about those today. And so our overall mission, aside from the specific research question that I'll address today, is to help train the community in environmental listening, to help build community around environmental issues, and to help people build stewardship and agency towards a more sustainable planet and a better sense of well-being and community. In the Acoustic Ecology Lab, we have a whole range of projects that are associated with these goals. And here I just want to point to one specifically, which is the Ecosonics project. This is just a little screenshot of some of the projects on our Acoustic Ecology Lab site. And here, some years ago, we did a very large study where we had over a year's worth of recordings in McDowell Sonoran Preserve over an 11-mile transect through the preserve. And we actually looked at the weather data associated with the recording periods, and we built a model that compared the psychoacoustic properties, which are things like loudness, these are perceptual qualities, loudness, brightness, harshness, etc., with the weather data of that particular moment. And what we found, and what you can see here in the chart, particularly over in this smaller section over to your right, is that there are extremely strong correlations between the perceived properties of the soundscape of that environment, and this is a natural preserve, and the weather properties. And what that indicates to us is that with change in weather and perhaps change in climate, the actual quality of the sound environment in which we live is also changing, and is likely to change really dramatically. These correlations are extremely strong. Now, this is the kind of way in which you as community members can support us in undertaking this research. As you can imagine, we had, I think, 11 recorders a mile apart recording for an entire year. You can imagine how much data that is to work with, and how difficult that is for us to get. So to work with the community in order to gather data to support our research is extremely valuable to us, and we thank you for wanting to be involved in that. Now, let me just minimize the side of, I can't actually read my slide here. Okay, well, I'll try, even though it's covered up. So the research question that we're asking you to help us with is a research question that is the basis of Celia Yang's PhD. Celia is also here today, and that is to ask, can the introduction of synthetic tones known through previous research to have beneficial health effects on humans when introduced into urban soundscapes, which might already be defined as noisy, harsh, rough, or loud, bring about a positive transformation in the human perception of those environments? In other words, in some areas of the cities around Tempe here, Phoenix, Scottsdale, and so on, there are areas that are set aside for public use. However, because the light rail runs past there, or there's a lot of traffic, or other reasons, the sound quality of those environments is not conducive to people spending time there. Now, the traditional way of addressing that would be through urban design and planting lots of trees and kind of making a barrier between the sound sources and the places that we want people to habitat. But we're asking, well, can we actually get around that by introducing resonant tones that are already known to have positive properties for human health into those environments in order to change the perception of the quality of those environments? And so this brings about the notion that the sound comes to our ear, gets turned into a bunch of electrical impulses and goes to the brain. And what happens between that point of electrical impulses in the brain is called psychoacoustics, and that is really interpretive. So that's based on our culture, on our upbringing, on our experiences in life, and so on. And this is a point at which we can actually have effect and think about sound qualities of our environment, which have not been addressed really previously in research. So the recordings that you can make for us will help us build a large data repository of urban soundscapes, which will give us material to analyze and to test. We have a large 50 loudspeaker dome here where we can create fully three-dimensional sound fields, and we will use some of your recordings in test experiments where we will introduce tones and use your recordings to create an environment to test subjects' responses to. I'll come back to the last part of that slide, why learn the listening modes, which I'll come to in a minute. So just very briefly, because time is short today, let's just talk about the benefits, which you might not have thought about, of listening to the environment around you. So mental health benefits are the first one I wanted to talk about. It's shown by the World Health Organization in a very large study in which they look at urban noise, and we try not to use the word noise because it usually means something derogatory, something we want to put aside. In the lab, we just talk about sound and acoustic ecology, because if we include all sounds in that discussion, then we can talk about balancing them and which ones have positive health effects and which don't, and how we're going to rebalance that, rather than putting aside a set of sounds such as aircraft noise or car traffic and so on, and saying those are noise and we're just going to put those somewhere else. That doesn't work for us. So if we think about reducing anxiety and what I was going to say is that the World Health Organization found that urban sound produced very substantial health deficits. And so those include high blood pressure, hypertension, stroke, even death. So living in environments that are very industrial and are persistent over a 24-hour period cause really substantial changes to your well-being. However, if we think about going the other way, that is listening to our environment, whether that's an urban environment or a rural or a national park environment, we find that it actually has very positive health benefits. So it reduces stress and anxiety, and it boosts your mood. And there's good evidence to show that just sitting in an urban environment and listening to bird calls in the park or around where you live and so on actually lowers cortisol levels. That simply paying attention, the act of paying attention to the ambient sounds around you, reduces mental fatigue and reduces stress. And this is also linked to positive emotions and the reduction of symptoms of depression in the community. It's also, you can think about that a little broadly, to think about the fact that through paying attention to your environment, you're actually thinking about being part of a community, part of an environment, which is also, of course, a positive effect for those people suffering from depression and anxiety. It also improves attention, focus, and mindfulness. So turning our attention to the environment produces a mindful state, and it can train our attention on being present in the moment, and really has similar effects to meditation, to just take time to simply listen. If we think about the physical benefits, it's been shown that just paying attention to our environment and listening lowers heart rate and lowers blood pressure. These are obviously good things in the long term, and that even in an urban environment that we might say is not conducive to good health, if you're just paying attention to the quality of that sound, you will still get these benefits. And regular practice improves sleep quality because, again, you're being more engaged with your environment. So rather than having perhaps a hostile engagement with the sound of the urban environment around you, you feel more part of that, and you're generally more at home. So you have much more restorative sleep. And finally, cognitive and emotional regulation. Again, the sense of paying attention and practicing environmental listening really builds up a subtle change in your engagement with your environment and fosters emotional adaptability, especially when the environment is very dynamic, such as an urban environment, and increases empathy and connection to place. And these are actually seem like things we talk about a lot, placemaking, a sense of place, but they're incredibly important to how much we feel embedded and at home, if you like, in the places in which we live. And just to point to the last part of that, there's also evidence to show that that sense of place or place attachment positively impacts emotional regulation and reduces a sense of loneliness and again, depression. Finally, additional benefits, especially if you're listening outdoors, which we will do a tiny bit of today, encourages you obviously to get outside, go for a walk, promotes ecological awareness, which is something that is really at the core of all of the work we do. And as I've just explained, contributes to well-being and psychological balance, strengthens memory and sensory integration through the sense of paying attention and being in those environments that stimulate you in various ways. And as I've already mentioned, builds community and strengthens bonds to that community. Now, we have an entire field guide about establishing community environmental listening groups, and there's a QR code here that you can scan to get a digital copy of that. It's our objective is to have 1 billion people listening to their environment by 2050. So we'd love you to engage with us on that. We're ready to support you to establish groups in your own community that gather regularly and listen to the environment. And this field guide gives you the tools to do that. The techniques that we'll touch on today are discussed here in much greater depth, and discussions about how you build that community and how you build those groups. But we're here to assist you. And by the end of April this year, we'll have a website with a community portal for you to also share experiences with. And so please come on board and join us with that. Now, one of the reasons that we're doing this and one of the reasons we're building these environmental listening groups is that we believe that building community, but also addressing climate impact, is something that can't just be left to institutions. And I heard Ezra Klein on his podcast a couple of years ago say that government is clearly not going to legislate fast enough to change climate trajectory and climate impact. And if that's the case, what next? And the answer for me is that, well, what's next is that we all get involved at an individual level. So building awareness in our environment is super critical to that. Being connected to our environments is super critical to that. And thinking locally, being part of the ecosystem that we actually live in, and hearing, for instance, the species change with climate changing, seasons, winter, summer, and so on. Even here in Phoenix, for those of you who are not here, there's quite a distinct transition between these seasons, and different birds come and leave and so on and so forth. And the sense of being grounded and belonging in that place is super important. So these are all things that we hope to change both through community environmental listening and through the specific question that we're addressing through this SciStarter project. I like to say to people that your environment is always speaking to you, and that when you listen to it, it's healing. You become really much more present in the place in which you live. Okay, so now just to touch on a couple of things that if you're local, you can come and join us. We have, as I say, you can see a picture here, a 50-channel loudspeaker system that creates a fully immersive experience of sound fields, and we've recorded lots of sound fields in Costa Rica, in Ecuador, and other places that we play there on a regular basis as a well-being experience. And we have several sessions still coming up, one next week and one this Thursday, one the following week, and another on May the 1st. Celia Yang runs those sessions, and you're welcome just to come along at any time during those sessions, spend as long as you like there. There's lots of cushions, you can just chill out, do yoga, whatever you want to do there. And then finally, just to touch on, again, the field guide, which will support you in thinking about community environmental listening. Now, the question that I haven't addressed, which was on a slide earlier, is why, when we're doing the SciStarter project, do we care about learning the listening modes? Why is community environmental listening important to us here? And the reason for that is that through these listening modes, which we're about to go outside and practice, and we're going to take you, Zoom community, with us to do that, you will develop a much more acute sense of the sonic properties of the environment. Every environment, this room, when we step outside, if we go downstairs, if we went somewhere, anywhere else on the campus, has a unique sonic signature. And learning how to listen to those, how to pay attention to the qualities of sound in those environments is super critical to being able to perceive the properties of those environments, right? So we're asking you to record in places that you around where you are on the campuses of ASU or anywhere else in the globe where you might pick up this project. But we're also asking you to tell us which listening mode you were listening in when you made that recording, right? And you'll see in a moment why that's important. But what I've found teaching these listening modes to students is that throughout the semester, they would come back to me and say, oh, I just heard this sound and I never realized that this bird lived here in my garden, or I never realized that the sound of the water running down through this drain was so interesting. And they find that they're hearing things in their environment they didn't used to hear, and that they're picking up on those and finding those rewarding as things that they're kind of discovering in their environment. So it helps you tune into your environment. It helps you then understand the quality of the sonic properties of that environment. And those are the very things that we want you to tell us about, so that we can use that as a way in which we then, when we do various scientific measures of the qualities of the sound, we can compare that to your reporting to us. Okay, so at this point, I would just ask briefly if there are any questions, and then after that, we will go outside and practice the listening modes. So I can see the chat has a bunch of things. Should I just go ahead and look at that, Emma, or do you want to?
I don't think there are any questions, but I was about to add one into the chat, so I'll just say it out loud if you can hear
All
me.
right.
Perfect. I just was curious, does all the listening have to happen outside, or is there a reason to be inside for some of this?
You can certainly practice your listening inside. However, going outside is a much more dynamic sonic environment, and so you will find it much more rewarding to listen outside, particularly in modern built environments. They're designed to be quiet and to have the sound contained, and not be distracting and so on. So it's better to practice it outside, but if you just want to practice doing active listening at your desk for 10 minutes at lunchtime, go right ahead. It'll still have those same health benefits.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was curious also, since I'm at the DC office of ASU, inside at the in the third floor where I work, it's still right next to my desk is the outdoors, the window where you can still hear tons of sirens. So I was curious if it was
Right.
also almost a check for how bad the inside environment might be too.
So I think the answer then for the SciStarter is to go through there are video tutorials of each of the listening modes on the SciStarter page, to go through those and then make a decision about which one of those you want to practice. And if it happens to be that there's lots of interesting things happening when you practice that at your desk, make the recording at your desk, that's fine. But certainly in terms of our research, we're really interested in how we can improve health benefits of the urban soundscape. And so that would be an outdoor environment generally, where the acoustic properties are often less considered.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, so we're going to go just outside onto the balcony here, where we can hear, a bunch of things. And we're going to practice we're going to practice passive directed and active listening. I'll explain those as we go along, and basically we'll practice each of those for about 3 minutes. I will then call everybody back, and then we will have a brief discussion about that experience. Please, those of you on Zoom, feel free to join in wherever you are. Send us questions or comments also as we're having those discussions, and then we'll wrap that up and come back inside for final questions. So we'll see you actually on Celia's phone Zoom from outside in just a couple of moments. Thank you. Right.
And Celia, I'm at the ready to add you as a co-host, but I don't see you yet.
You guys, do you want to come outside and listen to those? All right, let's go.
Yeah. Who knows what the technology will do?
Yes. Haywire.
Holding down the floor, appreciate it.
Roland, can you make Celia a co-host? There we go. Sweet. And I will force end our screen share here. Spotlight. All right. Now we're looking at Celia's shoes. For any of you on Zoom listening in, I'm gonna personally open my window just so I can hear outside and practice the listening as well. But I know Celia might unmute shortly to give more instruction.
We have all our Zoom photos.
Yep.
Okay, so what we're going to do is practice these 3 listening modes. Active listening, directed listening, and active listening. This is our little toolkit. What we like to do in every workshop is to leave everybody with this toolkit to take away and practice. The benefits are that anybody can do it. You can do it anywhere you like. It's free, so that's nice, right? And you'll find that through directing your attention towards listening in these ways helps refine the way that we give you the. So the first one is passive listening. Now what we're going to do here is that we're going to listen to the entire environment as a singularity. So what we're really doing is we're listening to the environment as a texture, right, which is transforming. I will say it has a morphology, it's transforming. And this is actually often quite difficult to do because we're we learn to listen for change, to listen for the scaffold that's going behind us, or the car over there, or our friend's voice over there, and to respond to that. But what we want to do in this exercise is not to allow our attention to be drawn to any particular sound object, but to keep a focus on the entire singularity. Now, my hint to you for doing that is to think about your consciousness really in the middle of your head, and to just think about this field that goes all the way around you that has texture that's transforming. Okay. You're welcome if you want to just move past a little bit so you might hear slightly different things. And what you're doing is directing your attention. And I'll give you 3 minutes, and then I will.
Okay, 3 minutes.
It's that's an Australian way of finding other people in the forest, lots of people. And it's a way of calling you backwards when it's for 5 people or 50. Okay, so that was passive listening. Any thoughts about that experience? Sorry.
I just feel calm.
You feel calm?
Yeah. Like the mind chatted and stopped because you had us focus up here, which was really nice.
Right, cool.
Yeah, I was starting to feel like the sound was kind of like bouncing around.
Yeah.
And sometimes my brain would wander more towards the bark sounds, sometimes like it picks like a bird sound for a second. So it felt like this very like being in the middle of something.
Right. So you can get a sense of how that sonic link as this particular place that we're standing in is made up of lots of different sounds, which we refer to as the acoustic ecology of this particular place. And you'll, in the next couple of notes, you'll think about how this is. The other thing to comment on that relates to both of what you were just saying is that one thing that's really unique about environmental listening is that you can only listen in the now. You can't think about you can't listen to what just happened or what's about to happen. You can only listen in the now, and you can only listen to the very best that you're alive. And that is really different. Most of the time we spend thinking about what we have to do, what went well, what didn't go well in the rest of the previous part of the day, and other places that we're going to go, not about being in this. Do you have any thoughts you want to share about that?
Similar, it's kind of like the orchestra, also different natural and man-made sounds blending together. And I see you managed to get a bus going through, and you obviously made arrangements for planes to go over. Right. So, all of it just kind of rolls out. And obviously feeling like you're in an orchestra.
Right. Cool. So then, if you were to go on practicing that technique, the thing that you would be practicing is letting go of the recognition of sounds as quickly as you can, until you get to the point of practicing that technique where your attention is no longer drawn. And you couldn't tell me I heard a bus, I heard a plane, I heard this, I heard that, right? But that actually, what I start to hear is kind of density of energy that's transforming around me. And it kind of gets heavy, and it gets light, and it gets thicker, and so on and so forth. And because we're standing in this environment that has this open aperture at one end, for everybody on Zoom, that's the kind of urban soundscape coming in there, built environment here. Then we're hearing this very out of balance quality, right? Lots of density, lots of heaviness and transformation going on there. This much lighter quality, this side of the sort of. So practicing would help you to not have your attention back to particular sound objects, and really to hear the text. And then that's fundamentally what you hear in every sonic niche, is that this sector tells you about the quality of that environment and the health of that environment. And when I showed you earlier the research that we've been doing about species density metrics, that's kind of essentially what it's looking at. And we've been noticing a real transformation in Joshua Tree National Park, for instance, when Joshua trees are actually dying off due to invasive grass species introducing viruses that attack the Joshua trees. And that very quality that you hear in passive listening is changing. It's quite fast. Okay, so the next one we're going to listen to, the second of our three techniques, is called directed listening. And what I want you to do in this case is kind of the opposite of what we just did. I want you to pick a sound, any sound, and then I want you to focus your attention more and more intensely on that sound. So it's kind of like a microscope, right? And the sound will usually be away from your body somewhere, so you might go over there and listen to, I don't know, if some high-heeled shoes walking along the other side of the road there. And what you want to do is you want to take your listening and put it out at that sound object, and like a microscope, focus on every micro detail. And you will notice a couple of things. One is that you can really put your listening a long way outside of your body. And secondly, as you practice that sense of really focused listening on a single object, you'll be able to hear more and more and more detail, the edge of the sound, the quality of the sound that you couldn't hear when you first started to listen to it, right? And that I still find that it's a bit like being in bed and hearing a sound in the house, and your listening goes out to that thing, this micro detail. Somebody in my house, or is it just the ice cream? Right? So it's a little bit like that, but we're intentionally practicing. So think about, again, addressing your intention towards listening in this mode, and really focus where your attention on the detail of the sound. When that sound goes, it's gone for whatever reason, just pick another one. Again, I'll give you 3 minutes, and I will call you back in the same way. So, a question for you is the same. How was that? What was different?
That's why I chose sound. I felt like when I didn't hear that sound, it was kind of disappointing. But I had to switch to a different sound. I started with birds, but the birds seemed to be kind of less vocal as we moved along. And so I ended up listening to people as they went by.
And every once in a while, of course, you get automotive sounds and just brown and sound. Yeah. So sometimes, yeah, I even take practice to really, so you can really zero in on a particular sound. A mouse.
You get really attached to that, so do a thing.
It felt less like I think last time you mentioned it was like an orchestra. It felt less like an orchestra, more like I could like feel the density of the sound, and once that went away, it would like go somewhere else really quickly. So it felt like my attention was being kind of drawn around in a different way.
Right.
It's less relaxing. It was more like a focus kind of attention task. to
Right,
do.
yeah, I think that's true. It doesn't have to be that way. If you were sitting in McDowell Reserve or something.
Yeah, we have like buses and
Yeah, you
birds.
would be able to focus more on an insect or something on bird and have that direct focus. But yeah, it's very dynamic. Some young man out there flexing his sort of.
Which is the environment here. It's very good.
That's right, yeah.
The bus sounds and like downshifting sounded like a bird, and then listening to it as a whole, and so it's not like jarring, but maybe just like weak. Like I didn't realize how loud it feels or sounds until I zoomed in on it. And then I also noticed it's really important for me to close my eyes, or else I'm looking for sounds, but you know. So you had mentioned like high heels, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll hear someone in high heels. Everyone's wearing sneakers and boots, and I can't hear it from here. But I was like, where's the sound that's like missing?
Actually, that's a very good point that I didn't raise, is that it is much better to close your eyes. And it brings up another point, which is that there are several other kind of listening techniques. You may have heard of sound walking, for instance, where you walk in a room through different sound environments, but you don't speak, you just listen. And these are all really interesting, but I think that the most powerful is actually to be still, where you're not having to address your attention to a range of other things, and then to really consciously practice the different techniques. And you may have noticed listening to the bus with that intentionality that you heard kind of rattles in the quality of sound things that you wouldn't have heard if you were just hearing a bus, right? And so you're really engaging with the sound of that bus, which would be different to every other bus in a very different way. Another thing that's quite useful to do when you're practicing that long term is to start to ask yourself, what is the sonic horizon? How far away can I put my hearing and still hear things? And what is the smaller and smaller details I can hear further away? So often when I'm practicing this technique, that's what I'm doing. Is I'm standing here today trying to think, what is the sonic horizon I can hear? And what is the smallest sound I can hear there? And what happens when I really focus on that? And it kind of gets louder and more defined and so on. And so I'm kind of bringing in like a telephoto lens would do in photography, bringing the distance closer to the truth. And then you can imagine when you're trying to embed yourself more in your own environment, that that's also extending the reach that you have in terms of that. Okay, now the final one that we're going to practice is active listening. And active listening is typically listening to all of the sounds and how they make, right? So when that truck was straight past, you could hear it reverberating through this space here, for instance. At the moment, I can't hear a lot of others, but you might hear some birds talking to each other. You might hear people talking to each other as they go past, and so on and so forth. So we're trying to listen to the interactions in the environment. And by that, I don't just mean like birds talking to each other, but literally how does the sound interact with this building and this space that we're in, all of the things that make up the quality of sound of this space. And so you're probably going to be addressing your attention to different sound objects really dynamically. And as we've already touched on, understanding the kind of complexity of that and the number of sounding sources that are around us. I'll give you 3 minutes. I'll be back at the same way. super interesting, because there's a lot of dynamic activity and then it kind of settled the quality of the settled environment allowed me at least to hear these tones of this building kind of singing as the services are working, all kinds of smaller details they started. But how was that for you guys? You can go first this time.
Feel like I'm going through all of this one is like more energizing for me. There was I opened my eyes, but there were two people walking who were leaving their car, and it just makes like almost like keys were hitting or like metal was hitting something else, and it was just like a really nice sound amidst all of the other sounds.
So that's both listening, using the kind of dynamic listening and the directed listening at the same time. They're trying to kind of tune in on that sound. And it's also called the cocktail effect. So if we're at a party and there are lots of people talking, we want to talk to one person, we can hear that person even though everyone else is talking around us, right? So we really have this ability to direct our attention to it. Anybody else?
I like thinking about how some of like the bigger noises move through like the air. So like the airplane feels like the sound kind of like reverberates and swells like across the whole area, which I noticed first. And then I was like, oh, the bus is actually gonna do the same thing, but like on the ground level. So it felt like since we're at like the third floor of the building, we're kind of have this absence of sound right here, whereas the bottom below us there's a lot kind of going on.
Yeah, especially with the more dynamic sounds like the aircraft, you can really hear that sound energy bouncing off the buildings.
Yeah.
And you start to become aware that everything in this environment has an impact on the sound in a really strong way.
Yes.
It also changes the kind of color of the sound based on the materials that are here and how many trees are here, how big the apertures, the openings and the buildings are. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Just that I began getting this idea of zones. So it felt like,
Okay.
there's this zone of close by in a parking lot, a zone of the street that was there, and they were just kind of going up and down depending on what was happening in that zone. And the skateboarder going behind and farther away, your construction and backup lights, whatever. Far away, having once in a while, building itself a little bit. So it was kind of just going in and out of these different zones that are active versus inactive.
Yeah, that brings about another consideration, which is in an urban environment where many of the surfaces are really hard. They don't absorb sound, so they just reflect it back into the environment. And so we hear even that reversing sound from way over, like quite a distance of there, making its way through the environment and coming to us here. Whereas if we were in a place that was heavily treed, that sound would absorb and we would have heard it here. So you can start to see why it's important to think about how we design these urban structures and where the sound sources come from and how they propagate through the environment. And even in the work that I've done in McDowell Snow Reserve, it's really clear that the sound of the roads there goes up the washes, even though it gets captured in the foliage and trees on the side of the road. Where there's a wash, it's like an aperture and the sound comes through and it goes up the sand washes and you can hear it much further away from the road on the wash than you can in other parts. All right, let's go back inside and join our Zoom colleagues.
Okay.
And
See you guys later.
the outside for a while.
Little bit.
A little bit. Okay, so just to wrap up, got only a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to say that this session should have provided you with a little toolkit, active or passive, directed and active listening. And that's a toolkit that you can go out and practice. That will really transform the way that you hear the environment around you and will assist you in choosing a place that you're going to record or multiple places that you're going to record for us for SciStarter. And will help you when you come to write what you heard and what was the quality of the environment that you were listening to. I also just want to point out that that listening, as I said outside, is a really unique thing, environmental listening, because you have to listen in the now and in the place where you are. You can't listen to the future. You can't listen to the past. You can't, well, you guys on Zoom actually were listening to University Drive, so you can listen to another place, I guess. But when you're doing it in person, you're listening to the very place that you're inhabiting. And so unless there are any other questions, any questions?
Dr.
Emma?
Paine, I was curious about, so with the submissions of data and people recording during Citizen Science Month and possibly beyond, what do you hope to be able to either publish or just share out based on the data that we'll be taking from ASU campuses?
Okay, great. So we will use that data to do analysis of the sound quality in terms of psychoacoustic properties, and then we will correlate that with what people tell us that they hear, and we will use some of those recordings in Celia's research to help build different kinds of urban qualities, and then to introduce artificial tones in them. And then that will be all part of the study, which looks at how and whether or not those artificial tones can transform our perception of urban environments without having to do very expensive groundwork, for instance. So we will, over the next couple of years, have results from that and publish that, and we'll be very happy to share it with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Please reach out to us at the Acoustic Ecology Lab, if you like, as well. If you want to know more about environmental listening and setting up environmental listening groups, please go to the SciStarter website and register, make a recording for us. It will really be very valuable to us, and we will be deeply grateful to you. And please take these 3 listening modes as your little toolkit and go out there and practice them 5 minutes. 3 times a week. You'll be shocked at how your listening changes. Thank you very much.